I asked my son when the wedding was, and my daughter-in-law smiled and said, "We got married yesterday. Only special people were invited." Instead, it wasn't Daniel who answered me. It was Kara, my daughter-in-law. She looked me straight in the eye, her lips curling into a smile that felt more like a blade than a gesture of joy, and said, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." Those 4 words froze me where I stood. Special people. I, who for 3 long years had been the one to cover their rent, $500 every single month. I, who had bought every piece of furniture in their apartment, from the sofa to the table to the dishes they ate from. I, who had filled their refrigerator with groceries when they had nothing. Suddenly, I was not special. I stood in the middle of my own living room, clutching the phone as though it weighed 1,000 pounds. My son, my only child, could not even look me in the eyes. He stared at the floor like a guilty boy, while Kara settled herself comfortably on the sofa I had purchased for them, as if she owned not only the furniture, but also the truth of my life. Upstairs, in the quiet of my closet, hung the pale pink dress I had bought with such care. It's spending $200 I could barely spare, imagining how proud I would look wearing it at Daniel's wedding. Next to it sat the new shoes I had chosen to match. That dress was meant for the photographs I dreamed of being in, standing beside my son, smiling, part of the memory of his most important day. But those photographs had already been taken, and I was not in them. For weeks I had planned. I had carefully set aside $1,000 to give them as a wedding gift. I had called my sister, Sylvia Novak, in Chicago, sharing the joy, telling her, "Daniel is finally getting married." I had scrubbed every corner of my home until it sparkled, thinking perhaps they would come back after the ceremony, that we would share a meal, that laughter and clinking glasses would fill these rooms again. All of it, every plan, every hope, collapsed in a second under the weight of those 4 poisoned words, special people. Daniel finally lifted his head, but the words that came out of his mouth sounded as though he had practiced them in front of a mirror. "Mom, it was an intimate ceremony, very small, just the 2 of us and the witnesses." But I wasn't fooled. I had already seen the photos on social media. I saw Kara's parents standing proudly next to the bride and groom. I saw her brothers and sisters raising their glasses of champagne. I saw Kara in her white wedding gown, her radiant smile captured forever, bought partly with the $800 I had given her just the month before for her personal expenses. I saw everything I wasn't supposed to see, and most of all, I saw the truth. In their world, in their story, I was already invisible. A week passed after the wedding I was never invited to. 7 slow days where I tried to move through my routines as if nothing had ruptured. Coffee in the morning, a cloth over the kitchen counter, a small walk to the mailbox. But every time I opened my closet, the pink dress was there, hanging like a mistake I couldn't take back. I would run my fingers over the fabric and feel the heat rush to my face, a mix of shame and anger that had nowhere to go. On the 7th day, the phone rang. The name on the screen, Kara. I let it buzz once, twice. Habit told me to answer. Pride told me not to. Something colder, curiosity maybe, made me pick up. Her voice was not the same voice that smiled and said I wasn't special. It shook at the edges, thin and breathy, like she was holding herself together with string. "Rosalind, the rent is late. The landlord is threatening to evict us. Didn't you forget to make the transfer?" I didn't speak. I listened. Because I knew that tone too well, the monthly panic, the manufactured urgency, the quiet certainty underneath that I would fix it. In the silence, I could hear room noise on her end, a door shutting, a muffled male voice, Daniel's, whispering something hurried I couldn't quite catch. Even his whisper sounded like a nudge. "Tell her. Push now." Memories lined up like bills on a table. Me at the bank just before closing, heart knocking, handwriting cramped on transfer slips. Me choosing beans and rice again so their freezer could have meat. Me clipping a coupon, putting back a small thing I wanted, reminding myself it was just until they got stable. Me refreshing the balance and feeling that tiny drop in my stomach each time the number went down for them, and not for me. And now, after I had been erased from my own son's wedding day, they were calling as if nothing had changed, as if I were a machine that dispensed money if you pressed the right buttons. Kara. I said at last, slow and even, surprised at how steady I sounded. I told you already. I only help special people. Silence. Not the polite kind, the heavy kind. I could hear her breathe, short, shallow. Paper rustled. A nail tapped against a surface. When she spoke again, the tremor in her voice tried to soften into sweetness. I don't understand. We've always been special to you. You're like a second mother to me. Second mother. On the surface, warm. Underneath, empty. The same sugar she always poured when she needed something. I knew that voice. It had asked for a little help. With the dress. With the honeymoon. With the rings. With whatever had to be perfect for a ceremony I wasn't allowed to see. I could almost hear the way her sentences curved when money was the point. Soft, careful, practiced. Something tugged at me. The old reflex to open the banking app, to move my finger to the same transfer button, to be useful. My hand actually hovered over the phone screen. Habit is a powerful thing. It moves you even when your heart is screaming, stop. I set the phone down on the table to break the spell and let my palm rest on the cool wood. I counted my breath. In the quiet, guilt and anger wrestled in my chest. Guilt for saying no to my son's household. Anger for being asked again so soon, so easily. On the line, Kara tried again, the pitch of her voice lifting just slightly. The way people do when they think a softer plea might work. We're under so much stress. Daniel can't sleep. We didn't expect this. You've always been there for us. Always been there. Yes, for 3 years I had been there. 2 there. Walking on eggshells in my own life, choosing my words, measuring my gestures, wrapping gifts that felt like apologies for not being enough, hoping one day I'd earn a real place in their hearts. I had been the quiet mother, the agreeable mother-in-law, the reliable transfer at the end of the month, who asked for nothing but a little respect that never came. Those 4 words, only special people, had cracked something open in me, and what spilled out wasn't weakness. It was clarity. Kara, I repeated, and my voice settled into something firmer. No. Another silence. I heard the faintest exhale like a held breath escaping. Then a quick swallow, a tiny click of her tongue as she changed approach. I don't know what's happening to you, she said more carefully. This isn't like you. We're family. Family. I looked at the pink dress again and thought about what family had looked like in those photographs. Her parents smiling beside them, her siblings raising glasses, everyone radiant. I pictured the envelope with the $1,000 I had set aside for a gift, still in my desk. I remembered the $800 I had handed her only a month ago for personal expenses, part of which I could now see in white satin and lace. I remembered Daniel's eyes sliding away from mine. When the call ended, because there was nowhere left for it to go, I sat on the edge of my bed. First, the familiar tired tears came, but then they changed. They got hotter, meaner, and I felt my face twist the way it does when anger is the only thing keeping you from drowning. I cried for the years I handed over my time and money and quiet patience and was told without words that none of it counted. I cried for every time my love was treated like a burden, my presence like an inconvenience, and my money like the only part worth inviting in. I cried for the woman I had let myself become, useful, dependable, invisible. When the sobs finally loosened their grip, a cold, clear thought slipped in. I started doing the math in my head, the way you do when you need to see the shape of the damage to understand it. Rent $500 a month. 3 years. That alone was $18,000. Food and supplies, just till next paycheck, about $200 a month. Another $7,200? Gifts and little emergencies, the things that never came back. At least a few thousand more. Over $20,000. Gone. Not from a bottomless well, but from my pension. From the savings Edward left so I could grow old without fear. For what? To be told I was not special. To be written out of the story of my own son's life. Staring at the ceiling, I faced the ugliest truth. I hadn't been giving out of love. I had been buying the feeling of being loved. And that feeling evaporates the second the money stops. Something hardened in me then. Not cruelty, not bitterness, but a boundary I should have drawn years ago. I didn't know exactly what I would do next. I only knew the rules had changed, and this time I would be the one to write them. That night, after Kara's call, I sat on my bed and cried. Not the soft, weary tears I had shed so many times before, but tears that scalded my face with anger. Anger at myself for allowing this to go on. Anger at them for seeing me as nothing but a purse with a pulse. Anger at the years of humiliation I had endured quietly, convincing myself it was love. When morning came, I walked to the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was the same tired one I'd seen every day. Wrinkles carved deep, eyes dulled by too many disappointments. But that morning, something new flickered in those eyes. A hardness, a clarity, a determination I hadn't recognized in years. I went to the kitchen table, where for 3 years I had counted bills to cover their expenses, scribbled notes to remind myself of due dates, planned and replanned my own finances around their whims. But this time the table became something else, a reckoning. I took out my checkbook, my bank statements, and began to write down the truth in black and white. Over the past 3 years, I had quietly covered their rent, $500 every single month, which added up to $18,000 in total. On top of that, I spent more than $7,000 on food and supplies, the kind of everyday things that kept their home running. There were also the gifts, birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries, all told another $3,000. When Kara had a medical emergency, I handed her $800 without a second thought. I paid off a car loan of $2,500 that they never repaid, $600 to fix their broken air conditioner, and $1,200 for the new living room furniture they wanted so badly. When I finally added it all up, the number staring back at me was staggering. $33,400. $400 gone, drained from my pension, from the savings Edward had left me so I could live out my last years in peace. Money meant for quiet evenings, for a trip I had promised myself, for security when my body grew too old to work. Instead, it had bought them comfort, convenience, and the audacity to erase me from their lives. I sat there for a long time staring at that number until the ink blurred, and then I stood up, got dressed, and left the house. At the bank, the familiar glass doors slid open. How many times had I walked through them, clutching transfer slips with Daniel's rent in my hands? How many times had I chosen to sit quietly, waiting while my account shrank month after month? Inside, Harold Benton, the branch manager, looked up and smiled when he saw me. He had known me for years, had processed every transfer to Daniel and Kara. His eyes flickered with surprise when I asked to speak with him privately. Sitting across from him, I placed my bank book on the desk and said, "Mr. Benton, I need to cancel all the automatic transfers. Every last one. And I want to make sure no one else has access to my accounts. Not now, not ever." He blinked, leaned back in his chair, studying me as though I were someone new. "Mrs. Bauer," he said slowly, "you've been making those transfers regularly for 3 years. Are you sure? Did something happen?" His voice held genuine concern, more genuine than anything Daniel had offered me in months. For a moment, the question cut me, like he thought maybe someone was forcing me to do this. I shook my head. No one is pressuring me. Quite the opposite. For years, I've been the one pressuring myself. And today that ends. "Mr. Benton nodded slowly, then began typing into his computer, processing the cancellations. As his fingers tapped the keys, my phone vibrated again and again in my purse. Daniel, Kara, Daniels. They must have felt it like a disturbance in their universe, realizing their lifeline was being cut. I let the phone buzz until it stopped. When Mr. Benton slid the papers across the desk for me to sign, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: lightness. The ink of my signature dried on the page, and with it, $33,400 of mistakes finally came to an end. For the first time in years, my money was mine. When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, my chest tightened. 3 cars were lined up at the curb, Daniel's, Kara's, and one I didn't recognize. My first thought was dread. They had keys to my house. I had trusted them once, and now the thought of them inside without my permission made my stomach twist. I stood at the door a moment, bracing myself before turning the handle. Inside, the sight stopped me cold. Daniel was slumped on the sofa, his head buried in his hands like a guilty schoolboy. Kara paced back and forth across the living room, arms folded, sharp steps echoing against the floor. At my dining table sat a stranger in a gray suit, rifling through my private papers spread across the wood as if they belonged to him. My voice came out louder than I expected. "What is going on here?" All three of them turned. For a heartbeat, it felt like I was the intruder in my own home. Kara was the first to speak. She put on that soft, desperate tone I knew so well. "Rosalind, thank God you're here. We need to talk. This is Victor Abrams, an attorney. He's here to help you with some documents, just a power of attorney to let Daniel and me handle your finances. We're only thinking of your well-being." I walked past her straight to the table, gathering up my papers from under the stranger's hands. My voice was flat, steady. "These are mine. You have no right to touch them without my consent." Daniel finally lifted his head. His eyes, once so innocent when he was a boy, now held only panic. He tried to sound reasonable, but the words came rehearsed. "Mom, we're worried about you. You've been acting strange. First, you cut off all support with no explanation. Then you don't answer our calls. You seem stressed, confused. We think you need help." "Confused," Kara added quickly, stepping closer with that fake tenderness she always wore when she needed something. "Rosalind, we know you're under pressure. At your age, it's normal to have episodes. That's why Victor is here, to make things easier for you." Her words hit me like ice water. So this was their game. Not just guilt anymore. Not just pleading. They were trying to paint me as senile, unfit to handle my own life. I stood taller, my voice cutting through the room. "I am not confused. I am clearer than I have been in years. And the only transfer of power happening here is this." I picked up the neat folder the lawyer had placed on my table and, without opening it, tossed it straight into the trash can. "You three out the front door." Silence. For a second, even Victor Abrams' polished lawyer mask slipped. Kara's mouth twisted. Daniel's face hardened into the angry expression he used to make as a child when he didn't get his way. "You can't do this," Kara snapped, her voice trembling between rage and panic. "We've made plans. We counted on you. Everything you have will be ours one day anyway. We're just trying to protect it now." And there it was, the naked truth stripped of sugarcoating. To them, I wasn't a mother or a person. I was an inheritance, a resource to be seized before time ran out. "Out," I said, pointing to the door. My hand didn't shake. "All of you. Now." Daniel stood, his tone shifting to something colder, almost threatening. "Mom, you can't just cut us off like this. We have obligations. Rent, the car, the credit card you co-signed. You can't turn your back on us." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but my words came sharp and clear. Who says I can't? For years, I've paid for things that weren't mine, filled a refrigerator in a home where I wasn't welcome, financed a life that had no place for me. That ends today. Victor closed his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Bauer," he said in that professional lawyer tone, "this isn't over. If your family believes you're no longer able to manage your affairs, the court can intervene. Guardianship is an option." I looked him dead in the eye. "Then do your research before you threaten me, Mr. Abrams. I've managed my own life for 71 years. I raised my son alone after Edward died. I worked, I saved, I survived. And I will not hand over my dignity to you or anyone else." Kara's eyes, stripped of their false sweetness, turned cold. "This won't end here, Rosalind. We have rights. We'll get lawyers, too." "Good," I said, opening the door wide. "Pay for them with your own money. Mine is no longer available." They left, their dignity wounded, muttering as they went. At the threshold, Daniel turned back one last time, his words heavy with anger. "This is going to end badly for you, Mom. You'll be alone, with no one to care for you when you need it most." I met his gaze, my voice low but steady. "I'm already alone, Daniel. The difference is, now it's by choice, not neglect." When the door closed behind them, the house fell into silence. For the first time in years, it wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of freedom. The morning after that confrontation, I woke up before dawn. Sleep had been a stranger. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face, hard, angry, unrecognizable from the little boy who used to press his cheek to my chest when he had nightmares. I heard Kara's cold voice echoing in the hallway. the lawyer's threats slipping off his tongue like oil, the sound of my own papers being rifled through on my table. It kept looping, like a film reel burning itself into my eyelids. This wasn't a bad dream. This was my life. For a long moment, I sat at the edge of my bed, palms pressed to my knees. My house was quiet, but my heart beat like a drum. Something inside me whispered, "No more." So I did what I should have done a long time ago. I called Martin Hale. Martin had been Edward's attorney, the man who had guided me gently through the paperwork after my husband died, a man who never rushed me, who never made me feel stupid for asking the same question twice. When he picked up the phone and heard my voice shaking, his tone changed immediately. I told him everything. How Daniel and Kara had arrived with a stranger, how they'd spread my private documents across my own table like vultures, how they'd spoken of my confusion while trying to push a power of attorney under my hand. I told him about the months of transfers, the slow bleed of my savings. By the time I finished, my throat hurt. Martin's face grew grave. He leaned forward, his hands steepled. "Mrs. Bauer," he said quietly but firmly, "this is elder financial abuse. Classic. They're trying to undermine your credibility so they can seize control of your assets. It's more common than you think. But we can fight this. We'll need documentation. Every transfer, every expense, every gift. Build the record. That's our shield." Hearing him call it by its name, abuse, felt like both a wound and a balm. It hurt to know it was true, but it steadied me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't standing alone in a storm. Martin laid out a plan, point by point, his voice like a lifeline. Change every lock in the house. Install a comprehensive security system with cameras. Open a new account at a different bank, one they know nothing about. Update my will to protect what Edward and I had built. It was the kind of plan Edward would have approved of. Practical, no nonsense, protective. As Martin spoke, I could almost hear Edward's low voice from years ago. "Don't let anyone push you, Rosie. Not even family." That afternoon, with my notes still in my purse, I walked into Paul Carver's hardware store. The smell of metal and sawdust hit me, familiar and strange. Paul had known me for years. He'd watched me come in for nails, light bulbs, screws, most of them for Daniel and Kara's apartment. He had never said a word, just rung up my purchases and given me a quiet nod. This time it was different. "Mrs. Bauer," Paul greeted me, wiping his hands on his apron. "Another fix-it job for your son?" I shook my head. "Not this time, Paul. This time it's for me." My voice caught a little, but I straightened. "I need every lock in my house changed. The best you've got." His eyebrows rose, but he didn't ask why. He just started pulling down sturdy, top-quality locks, setting them gently on the counter like he was laying out armor. From the back came his son, Liam Carver, tall with calloused hands, a friendly smile, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Paul gestured to him. "Liam handles the tech side. Security systems, cameras, motion sensors. If you're looking to protect the place, he's your man." Liam set down a box, wiped his palms, and looked at me kindly. "Mrs. Bauer, we can put in a full system for you. Cameras at the doors, sensors, the works. You'll be able to see who's at your house right from your phone. And if anyone tries to break in, the police will be called automatically." For a heartbeat, the air caught in my throat. The bitter irony of it. A mother needing cameras not to guard against strangers, but to protect herself from her own flesh and blood. I felt the sting of tears, but blinked them back. "Do it, Liam," I said. "The sooner, the better." He smiled gently. "We'll come by first thing tomorrow morning. You'll sleep easier once it's in." As I walked out of the store with Paul's sturdy locks in a bag and Liam's promise in my pocket, something inside me shifted. The fear was still there, the grief still raw. But under it, a steady current of resolve ran stronger than before. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. I was protecting myself. And as I stepped into the sunlight, the weight of the bag cutting into my palm, I thought of Edward. Maybe he was watching. Maybe, wherever he was glad I was finally standing up, not just for my money, but for myself. It was late afternoon when the phone rang again. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but I had a feeling. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Rosalind." The voice came sugar-sweet. Kara. She must have borrowed someone else's phone. I was thinking, maybe we could start fresh. How about dinner together? Just you, me, and Daniel. Like a family again. For a moment, I let the silence sit. I could almost see her rehearsing the lines, forcing a smile through the receiver. Then, right on cue, the sweetness thinned and the truth showed through. We're 2 months behind on rent. It's $1,000. If you could just help us this one last time, we could breathe again. Please. My chest tightened, not with guilt this time, but with a strange calm. The words came out steady, sharper than I expected. Kara, don't pretend this is about family. You don't call me because you miss me. You call me because you miss my money. You remember me for my wallet, not for my heart. And I won't play that role anymore. There was a pause, a soft gasp, and then the line went dead. I set the phone down. My hand shook, but not from fear, from release. Something inside me loosened, like a knot I had carried too long finally coming undone. The next morning, I decided to do something for myself. For once, not for Daniel, not for Kara, not for anyone else. For me. I walked into Vera Collins' salon, a place I hadn't visited in years. Vera looked up from behind the counter, her eyes lighting up. Well, look at you, Mrs. Bauer! What can I do for you today? I smiled, almost shy. The works, Vera. Hair, nails, whatever you've got. I think it's time I felt like myself again. As Vera worked, the mirror showed a woman I barely recognized. My hair trimmed and styled, the gray softened into something elegant. My nails polished. The years of exhaustion on my face seemed lighter somehow. When Vera spun the chair around, she put her hands on my shoulders and said softly, "You're not just beautiful, Rosalind. You're free." Her words sank deep. For the first time in months, maybe years, I believed them. That evening, as I settled at home, a knock came at the door. It was Joan Whitaker, my neighbor, the widow who lived next door. She carried a small plate of cookies, still warm, their sweetness filling the air. "I heard raised voices yesterday," Joan said gently as she stepped inside. "I hope you don't mind me checking in." We sat at the kitchen table, and soon my story spilled out. Daniel, Kara, the money, the humiliation, the lawyer at my own dining table. I expected pity, maybe shock. Instead, Joan's eyes softened with recognition. "My daughter did the same to me," she whispered. Took advantage until I finally said no. It nearly broke me, but saying no was the start of my healing. Something in me shifted as she spoke. The loneliness I had been drowning in didn't feel so heavy anymore. Here was someone who understood, not in theory, but in truth, in scars. We talked for hours, trading stories like bandages, covering each other's wounds with words and laughter. By the time Joan left, the house didn't feel quite so empty. For the first time in a long while, I felt something stronger than grief or anger. I felt companionship. I felt the faint outline of a new life, one built not on pleasing others, but on reclaiming myself. And as I locked the new bolts on my door that night, I whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." It didn't take long for Daniel and Kara to show their displeasure. Almost every other day, their car would roll down my street, creeping slow as if they were hunting. They would park across from my house, sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer, sitting there with the engine idling, watching. At first, I pulled the curtains closed. But after the second, third, 10th time, I stopped hiding. I would stand at my front window and look right back at them. The cameras Liam had installed captured every moment, every license plate, every minute they sat there trying to intimidate me. I sent the footage to Martin Hale. He wasted no time. Within a week, he had filed for a temporary restraining order. For the first time, the law was on my side, not theirs. But they weren't finished. One Tuesday morning, just as I was making tea, a knock came at the door. On my porch stood a woman with a clipboard dressed neatly, her badge clipped to her jacket. "Mrs. Bauer?" she asked. "I'm Natalie Cruz from Social Services. I need to speak with you." My stomach dropped. "What's this about?" She sighed, glancing at her papers. "We received a report alleging that you've been acting irrationally, cutting off financial support to family without reason, installing surveillance equipment due to paranoia, refusing necessary medical care. I'm required to investigate." The words hit like stones. I didn't need to guess where the report had come from. I let her in. My hands trembled as I poured tea, but my voice stayed steady. "Please sit." I have nothing to hide. Natalie looked around carefully, as though searching for signs of neglect or confusion. But before she could even begin her questions, Martin arrived. He had timed it perfectly. He laid a thick folder on my kitchen table with a quiet, decisive thud. "Here's what you need to see," he said, sliding it across to her. Inside were copies of bank transfers, checks, receipts, 3 years' worth of evidence. Line after line showing $33,400 in support I had provided to Daniel and Kara. Rent payments, groceries, gifts, medical expenses, even their furniture. There were also letters from my doctor attesting to my good health, both physical and mental. Notes from community members who saw me active, lucid, and independent. Proof that the cameras were not paranoia but protection. Protection from the very people who had reported me. Natalie flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing deeper with each turn. She looked up at me, then at Martin. "This is thorough, very thorough." Finally, she set her pen down. Her voice was calm but firm. "Mrs. Bauer, there is no evidence here of incapacity or neglect. Quite the opposite. What I see is a clear record of exploitation by your relatives. I'll be closing this case immediately." Relief washed over me so suddenly my eyes burned. For days I had feared strangers would believe their lies, that the government itself would strip me of my independence. But now the truth was in black and white. Natalie stood, tucking the folder under her arm. "If they harass you again, keep documenting." "You've done the right thing, Mrs. Bauer. Don't doubt yourself." As the door closed behind her, I leaned against the wall, exhaling for what felt like the first time in weeks. The lies had reached the authorities, but so had the truth. And for once, the truth had spoken louder. I thought things might quiet down after the social worker closed her file. But I was wrong. Daniel and Kara weren't finished, not by a long shot. Within 2 weeks, Martin called me with the news. "They've filed a petition in family court," he said gravely. "They're asking the judge to declare you legally incompetent and to appoint a guardian. Guess who they want that guardian to be?" I didn't need to guess. My own son. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound I had ever known. I had carried that boy for 9 months, raised him alone after Edward died, worked myself to the bone so he could have opportunities. And now, at 35 years old, he was standing in court papers calling me unfit to handle my own life. The petition was stuffed with evidence. Kara had written a declaration dripping with false concern about how I had become confused, paranoid, and hostile. My neighbor, George Pratt, who had never liked me anyway, added fuel to the fire, claiming I acted strangely, installing cameras as if I lived in a war zone, yelling in the street, entertaining strangers. Strangers. Those strangers were my friends, the first real friends I'd had in years. Worst of all, my pharmacist, Anthony Wells, was listed as a witness. According to their papers, he had signed a statement saying I neglected my medications and refused treatment. My heart sank when I read that. How could Anthony, who had always been polite to me, say such things? Martin and I went straight to the pharmacy. The moment Anthony saw me, his face flushed red. "Mrs. Bauer, I need to explain," he stammered. "Kara came in a few weeks ago. She said she was worried about you, that you weren't taking proper care of yourself. She asked me to confirm that you don't buy prescription medications regularly. I told her you only ever buy vitamins and the occasional aspirin. She handed me a paper, looked official. I thought it was for insurance. I signed it. I didn't realize..." He shook his head, guilt written all over his face. "I didn't realize it would be used against you in court." I took a breath, steadying myself. "Anthony, what I need now is the truth. A new statement in writing, explaining exactly what happened. That I'm not on medication because I don't need it, not because I'm neglectful." He nodded immediately. "Of course. I'll do it today." That gave me one piece of ground back. But with George Pratt, there was no reasoning. When Martin questioned him, he sneered. "She's not normal. Who her age changes every lock on their house, installs cameras, and spends all day with outsiders. Something isn't right with her." I wanted to shout at him, to tell him those locks and cameras were because my own son had broken into my home, but I didn't waste the breath. Martin put a hand on my arm afterward. "Don't worry about him. He's bitter and biased. What matters is medical evidence. So that's what we got. Martin arranged for me to meet Dr. Fiona Clark, a highly respected psychiatrist who specialized in capacity evaluations. For 2 hours, she tested me. Memory recall, problem solving, financial decision-making, even little logic puzzles I hadn't done since school. I answered everything carefully without rushing. At the end, she looked at me with kind but piercing eyes. "Mrs. Bauer, your results are excellent. In fact, your cognitive function is well above average for your age. You are fully competent. Anyone who says otherwise is either mistaken or has another motive." Her words filled me with a strength I hadn't felt in weeks. This wasn't just my own insistence anymore. I had proof from a professional that I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't alone. Joan Whitaker, my neighbor who had become a dear friend, promised to testify that she saw me daily, independent, capable, and strong. Lucia Romero and Beatrice Nguyen, women from my old gardening club, reached out to me with encouragement and offers to stand by me. And Irene Caldwell, sharp as ever at 80 years old, looked me in the eye and said, "I'll walk into that courtroom with you, Rosalind. Let them try to tell me you're not clear-headed." That night, I sat in my living room, papers spread across the table. Anthony's new statement, Fiona Clark's report, notes from my friends. Outside, the house was quiet, but inside my chest, a storm raged. Daniel and Kara thought they could strip me of my dignity, my freedom, my very right to live as myself. But I wasn't the timid woman I had been when this all started. I had evidence. I had witnesses. And most of all, I had resolve. The battle was coming. And this time, I was ready to fight, not just for my money, but for my name, my mind, and my life. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm cloud I couldn't escape. I dressed in my best black suit, the one I had saved for special occasions, though this hardly felt like one. As I looked in the mirror that morning, I saw not just a 71-year-old widow with tired eyes and lines etched by time. I saw a woman walking into battle. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and paper. When I walked in, Daniel was already there in a new suit that I'm sure he couldn't afford without me. Kara sat beside him, dressed in somber black as if she were attending a funeral. Maybe she was, the funeral of our family. Neither of them met my eyes. Their lawyer, polished and confident, rose first. He painted me as a fragile old woman on the verge of collapse. "Your Honor, this is a case of a once capable mother slipping into confusion. Mrs. Bauer has become paranoid, easily manipulated by outsiders, and hostile toward her own family. She has abruptly cut off financial support without rational explanation, installed surveillance cameras out of delusional fear, and isolated herself under the influence of neighbors and lawyers." Every word was a dagger, twisting the story of my strength into a picture of madness. Then came the parade of witnesses. Kara went first. Her performance could have won an award. Tears streaked her cheeks as she clutched a tissue. "Rosalind has always been like a second mother to me," she said in a trembling voice. "It breaks my heart to see her memory failing, to watch her decline. She forgets things. She lashes out. We just want to make sure she's safe." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. When Martin stood for cross-examination, his voice was sharp, steady. "Mrs. Bauer, can you name the last time you called Rosalind without asking her for money?" Kara blinked rapidly, caught off guard. We always talked about many things." "A date, please," Martin pressed. I don't remember the exact date." He stepped closer. "Is it true you and Daniel were married without inviting Rosalind?" Her face flushed. "It was a very small ceremony. Is it true that when she asked why, you told her only special people were invited?" Her lips trembled. Those words were taken out of context. Martin leaned in, his voice quiet but deadly. "And what context exactly makes it acceptable to tell a mother she isn't special?" The courtroom was silent. Kara lowered her eyes. Next came Daniel, my son, my only son. He looked at the judge with practiced solemnity. "My mother has always been generous, but lately she's been erratic. She's cut us off for no reason. She ignores our calls. She refuses to let us help her." Martin rose again. "Mr. Bauer, how much money have you received from your mother in the last 3 years?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I don't know the exact figure. Does $33,400 sound familiar?" Martin snapped, holding up a ledger of transfers. Daniel swallowed hard. Maybe she's always been generous. And is it true that you and your wife entered your mother's home without permission and rifled through her private papers? Daniel's face tightened. We were worried about her. And is it true that you pressured her to sign over power of attorney in your presence with your lawyer? He looked at Kara, then back at the floor. We wanted to help her manage things. Help or take control? Martin asked, his voice like ice. Then came George Pratt, my sour neighbor. He puffed his chest and spoke with disdain. She's been acting strangely for weeks. Cameras on every corner, strange people coming in and out, shouting in the street at her own son. Martin didn't flinch. Mr. Pratt, are you aware those strange people are her longtime gardening club friends? That the cameras were installed after her son and daughter-in-law entered her house without permission? That the so-called shouting was her defending her home from trespassers? Pratt's mouth opened, then closed. I didn't know the details. Exactly, Martin said coolly. Thank you. Daniel's side called Dr. Peter Lang, a psychiatrist. He testified with authority. Mrs. Bauer's refusal to undergo an earlier psychiatric evaluation is, in itself, indicative of decline. In my opinion, her behavior suggests emerging dementia. Martin rose. Doctor Lang, did you personally examine Mrs. Bauer? No, he admitted. I reviewed reports provided by her family. So your conclusion is based not on your own evaluation, but on their accounts? Yes, but no further questions, Martin said, slicing him off. Then it was our turn. Dr. Fiona Clark took the stand. Her voice was calm, her presence commanding. I conducted a full neuropsychological evaluation of Mrs. Bauer. Her memory, reasoning, and financial judgment are not only intact but above average for her age. There is no evidence of impairment. She held up her report. This is not opinion. This is data. Next came Anthony Wells, my pharmacist, pale with guilt. I need to clarify, he told the court. I was misled by Kara Bauer. She asked me to sign a statement claiming it was for insurance. I never said Mrs. Bauer neglected medication. She simply doesn't require any regular prescriptions. Then Joan took the stand, followed by my gardening club friends, Lucia, Beatrice, and Irene. Each spoke plainly with warmth. They told the court how they saw me weekly, how we gardened, shared meals, laughed together. Rosalind is clear-headed, strong, and more alive than I've ever seen her. Irene said firmly, her 80-year-old voice steady. Finally, it was my turn. I stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. My voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word. I was excluded from my own son's wedding. I spent 3 years paying their rent, their groceries, their emergencies. $33,400 of my retirement savings. Gone. I gave and gave and gave. And in return, I was told I wasn't special. I was treated as a burden, a wallet, not a mother. When I finally said enough, they called me crazy. They brought me here, into this courtroom, to strip me of my dignity. I paused, looking straight at Daniel. His face was rigid, his jaw clenched, but his eyes flickered. I am not confused. I am not incompetent. I am clear, and my choice is simple. I will no longer finance people who do not respect me. When I finished, the silence was absolute. Judge Robert Sinclair leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. After reviewing the evidence, this court finds no basis for guardianship. Mrs. Bauer is fully competent. Professional evaluations confirm her clarity. Witnesses attest to her independence. What is evident here is not her incapacity, but a pattern of financial exploitation. The petition is denied. The gavel struck, and the sound rang through me like freedom itself. I had won, not just the case, but my life back. When Judge Sinclair's gavel struck, something broke free inside me. The chains I had carried for years, chains of guilt, of obligation, of false love, shattered in that single sound. I walked out of that courthouse with my head high, my steps steady. Behind me, Daniel and Kara shuffled away with tight jaws and cold eyes, their lawyer trailing in silence. They didn't look back, and for the first time, neither did I. In the weeks that followed, I made decisions I never would have dared before. I sold the house that had once been full of their footsteps, their demands, They're shadows. I moved into a bright apartment downtown. Smaller, yes, but filled only with my own presence. No ghosts of arguments, no echoes of slammed doors. Just me. With the money I had left, I did what Edward would have wanted. I lived. I booked a ticket to Europe, walked cobblestone streets I had only seen in postcards. I stood in front of paintings in Paris, and for the first time in years, picked up a brush myself. Colors spread across a canvas under my hand, not for anyone else, not to please or buy affection, just because it made me happy. I gave too, but differently. Not to people who drained me, but to causes that mattered. Half my savings went to charities that protected seniors from the very kind of abuse I had endured. Every check I wrote felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, turning pain into something that could save someone else. As for Daniel and Kara, I never saw them again. I heard whispers, of course, that they had moved into a smaller apartment, that Kara had finally taken a job, maybe her first real one. Perhaps hardship would teach them the value of work, the dignity of independence. Perhaps not. It was no longer my concern. What I knew was this. For years, I thought I had been giving out of love. But I see it now. I had been buying an illusion, feeding a dream that was never real. True love doesn't demand a price tag. True love doesn't need to be purchased. Some nights I sit on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights sparkling below, and I whisper to the stars as if Edward can still hear me. I'm free now. And freedom, my love, was never too expensive. Because if life has taught me anything, it's this. Freedom is priceless. If this story moved you, please tap like and subscribe. Your one click helps more people find the courage to set boundaries. Share this with someone who needs to hear. Love without respect is a bill that never stops. See you in the next story.